Welcome to my channel. Today we're at the Walking History Tour, Selma, Alabama. If Graves Could Talk, found in 1829 Old Live Oak Cemetery. If you're new to my channel, please subscribe. Follow me on my social media. Let's go check it out.
In 1786, I attended University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, where I graduated with a law degree in 1803. I have served 46 of my 67 years at the public service. I was both as a town councilor, as a House of Legate congressman, both state and federal. I have been the minister to St. Petersburg and Naples. I have also was finally elected at one point to be president pro tempore of the United States Senate. You know who holds that position nowadays? The Vice President of the United States. But this was when I was, at that time, the most respected and senior member of the Senate held that position, which meant I got to break all the tie votes. In 1818, I moved to Alabama to my beloved Chestnut Hill plantation up on the Alabama River, which is now known as Kings Bend, but it was Chestnut Hill at the time. And I was known throughout my life as the genteel Southern gentleman of uncommon decency and can't think of the word. I was born in 1886. It's hard to know. 1786. Hard to remember all that stuff. Anyway, in 1852, I was elected vice president with Franklin Pierce as the president that year. But unfortunately, due to disease, tuberculosis, I was forced to go to Cuba for my health. But while I was in Cuba in 1853, I was sworn in as the Vice President of the United States. I am the only American executive ever made Vice President outside the boundaries of the United States. And that was by a special law passed by the Senate. I was in the Senate for years and well respected, and so the Senate passed a special law that allowed me to go ahead and become Vice President while I was still in Cuba. In April of 1853, I returned to my beloved Chestnut Hill, but unfortunately I died just a couple of days after I got back. And I was originally buried at Chestnut Hill, but some scallywags from Selma, which I'm credited with founding Selma, and I did help get the name Selma, which was after a poem that I really enjoyed. But anyway, the folks from Selma decided they were going to kidnap me and bury me here. And then the folks from Lowndes County took me back that way. And then they stole me again and put me here. And for years, high school students in this town, as an initiation prank, had to spend the night in my tomb, which at that time didn't have a door on it. But finally they had put a door on it and locked it so I could rest in peace, thank God. But anyway, I have really enjoyed being here, and I thank y'all so much for coming on this tour. And I hope that you have a wonderful evening.
I grew up in South Carolina. I am not a native of Selma or Alabama, but I understand from my other residents here in this lovely cemetery that my story is worth telling. I graduated from Oglethorpe College in Atlanta, Georgia, at which time I felt a call to ministry. I wanted to become a minister, a pastor, someone that could help a flock, a congregation. So after that those studies in Atlanta, I in turn ended up in Columbia, South Carolina, where I studied at Columbia Theological Seminary, a great part of the community. We began to teach and preach and minister to the fine folks here in this beautiful, beautiful cemetery. 1855 is when I came here. If you look from the historical facts, that's getting very much closer to the war between the states. Well, as we heard the war happening and things beginning to fall in place for a war between the states, we had a fear that the Yankees were going to come to Selma because we had a great munitions factory here where all types of ammunition was made.
Welcome, y'all. I am George Washington Gale. Do we have any Yankees in the group? Yankees? I don't like you. Let me tell you why I don't like you. Yankees have no sense of humor. None whatsoever. This has not been my experience. Back towards the end of the war of the Yankee aggression, it became apparent that we were having issues becoming victorious. So I decided that the best way to kill the snake was to cut the head off. So I decided that I was going to make up a group financed by donations to assassinate Abraham Lincoln, Johnson, his vice president, and Secretary of State, who was second in line to the presidency. Now, before y'all correct me, I know that the Speaker of the House is currently that next in line, but during this time it was the Secretary of State. I set about to fundraise, put out advertisements in local newspapers in an attempt to raise $1 million to finance 3 assassins to go and kill all 3 of these men within a few nights. As it turned out, my reputation preceded itself, and I was unsuccessful in this effort. Most people deeming me a rogue, scallywag, con artist, or at best just a jokester. So my plan failed. A few weeks after these articles in the paper appeared, one of which was a fine letter to the editor that I wrote entitled Death to Tyrants, which I thought was very appropriate. Well, John Wilkes Booth walks up behind the president in the Ford Theater, caps that boy right in the back of the head, jumps to the stage, breaks his ankle, hollers death to tyrants, albeit in Latin, and limps off into history. About the time that the Yankees were overrunning our fine city here and burning half of it, word of the president's assassination came down. And as things got around, my name came up, especially associated with those words, death to tyrants. And as I was sitting in my living room enjoying a spot of tea with my lovely wife down in Hobbs, a knock came on my door. I opened my front door, and behold, in my yard was a sea of blue. These men were not there to discuss things. They took me into custody, much against my protestations of innocence and that it was all just a joke. I had nothing to do with the conspiracy. But as I said before, you Yankees have no sense of humor. See this beautiful monument right here? That's my daughter's. This is my stone. Well, at least they spelled my name right. Ladies and gentlemen, enjoy the rest of your tour. And thank you for coming out.
And good evening, good evening. I am Benjamin Sterling Turner, and it's raining. Nice to see you today. I was born in Halifax, Virginia. And at the age of 5, I was sold to a family who I fell in love with. and husband and wife, they took good care of me, and even though I was a slave, and then her husband died, and the widow had to come on home here to Alabama. So she brought me here to Alabama, and I worked with her for a while, and on the plantation, we did all the necessary work, planting the crops, reaping the crops, working very hard. But I always had in my heart that I wanted to learn to read. That was my ambition. I did not want to grow up and cannot read. And so I would hear them teaching the children, and I would take notes. While I work in the house, I would hear them teaching the children. I will make my notes, and I will memorize, and I will learn to spell until I begin to search for myself and find a way that I can teach myself. Finally, I taught myself to read. But as it went on, I became older, and now it was time for me to go out into the hardest work. There I had an overseer who didn't like me there, and she promised her sister that I would be diligent, and I would be fair, and I would be honest, and I knew that was my blueprint for my success. So I went on down there, and I served her diligently and well. And while I was serving one day, on my off hours for lunch, I went to the back, and I took out the book, and I began reading. She came and she caught me, but she did not get mad. She said, "Ben, I didn't know you can read. If I knew you can read, I would put you at the front desk as a clerk." And so that was good for me. I picked the people up, shared their luggage, take them to the room, register them, and did all that she would ask me to do. And then one day she said, "Ben, with your strength and your responsibility, on your spare time, why don't you try to start your own little business?"
You hear that? It was sweet.
I think I heard it. Alright guys, this has been interesting.
This lady handled that fire. Was it burning in the back?
Lots of old history here.
Good evening. I'm Francis John Hobbs. Welcome to Selma. A little bit of my background. Back in 1845, two brothers from Massachusetts headed to Selma to open a jewelry store. Now, if you think 1845, that sort of puts in perspective that Selma, Dallas County in central Alabama really was probably one of the central spots of commerce in the whole nation at that time to be able to support a jewelry store. Well, the two brothers from Massachusetts, they were doing real well, and in 1860 they started hearing rumors of what was happening politically to our country. So since they were from up north, they headed back home. In the meantime, put an ad in the Boston newspaper to sell their jewelry store. Well, another northern young man, Mr. Hobbs, he saw the ad and sight unseen, he came to Selma and purchased a jewelry store. And that's where I come in. Mr. Hobbs jumped right into the social functions of the community. And at the time, my daddy was the mayor of Selma, so naturally there were parties and galas all the time. So I met Mr. Hobbs at one of these parties, and for whatever reason, he fell head over heels for me, and he started courting me, and I kept turning him down. But after 2 years of courting, I finally gave in, and I agreed to marry him. And this was in 1862, so the war had already gotten some traction. So in 1864, my husband, with the war still undecided, he knew what he had to do and serve his adopted homeland. So in 1864, my husband went to join the Confederacy.
The Alabama State Representative. All it says is that I was the wife of Joseph G. Wilkins. But I don't mind. My husband was a good husband. He helped me fight women's suffrage, and he gave me 3 beautiful children, one of which is buried here, our son. In those days, well, let me start from the beginning. I was born here in Selma in 1875 to Frederick and Alexina Hooker. It was during those days that women were not allowed to go to school. So my parents convinced Boss Calloway of Calloway High School that I was a very bright and energetic young lady and that I would do very well at his high school. And with me, I was very happy in that role for many years. And then in 1910, a group of my friends approached me and expressed an interest.
Present themselves to the Supreme Court of Alabama, please. Oh my goodness. Why, good evening. I should introduce myself first. Got a little carried away there. As a matter of fact, you will notice I am not in my judge's robes. I'm actually in my choir robes, and we'll explain that as we go on here. My name is Jonathan Harrelson. I visited...
But he died young, and after that, you would think Clara would come home to Selma to be with her family, but no, she stayed in New York. Why in the world she would want to stay up there, I have no idea. Personally, I never left Selma, stayed right here. Clara even offered me money in her will to take a world cruise, and I just turned it down. I just wouldn't leave Selma. But it kind of worked out to Claire's benefit. She worked with Tiffany, designing stained glass windows, and she eventually had a studio in Paris, studied at the Sorbonne. She had a solo exhibit in Paris, which was unheard of in the 1920s for women. And she was in what you call it, an art show in England, where she was voted the most representative of American art. She also traveled in Italy, and she's probably most well known for her stained glass windows. There are several here in Selma. One in St. Paul, several in Selma, St. Paul and Pittsburgh. There's a mural that Clara designed in First Baptist Church, and she did a few stained glass windows there. Her biggest one was probably at St. Michael's and All Angels in New York City. It was a large 7-panel window. And, of course, that's the only one that the Yankees get to see. We get to revel in many more. And if you'd like, you can go to Sturdivant Hall and see more of her paintings and sketches. In fact, there's probably a few gracing the walls of a few homes in town, too. Other things, there's just oodles of artists here in Selma.
We're transplant Yankees, or it may have been because my sister Martha had the most horrible disposition of bad temper. We were given letters of protection from aid so that we could go visit Mary, our sister, in Washington periodically. And it gave us safe passage. Our little crew, our little traveling party was never stopped and searched until it was discovered that my sister Martha had been smuggling medical supplies to the Confederacy in her petticoats. Abe was enraged and so immediately cut us off from any further visitation. He was more embarrassed and let her off with a warning. He could have prosecuted her and sent her to prison. But because of our sister, of course, he didn't do that. We didn't know what it meant to be Southern Belle. When I would go visit Martha at her home from my home, she lived just 3 blocks away. And her home is now called White Horse Cottage. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it was only 3 blocks, and the walk was covered with oaks and magnolias, except for a few different spots. And I hated the hot sunlight. I wanted to constantly be in the shade. So when I ran out of tree, and it was still on my traversing to Martha's home, then I would raise my skirts and I would run to the next set of trees. That became known as Elodie's Trotz. My husband thought it was the cutest thing. I not famous for this, but I have a pretty good, decent secret recipe for chicken salad. It's not sweet like you make today, serve on the table, it's more savory. And if you are in town the first weekend of every month, Miss Ann Hoffman Murray has a shop on Lauderdale, an antique shop, and she always has my chicken salad for sale, so you'll have to try it. I was actually instrumental in the founding and the leader of the Ladies American Association, Memorial Association, later to be known as the United States Daughters of the Confederacy. I was instrumental in getting erected the Confederate Soldiers Monument that is over here. This is Confederate Circle. Our ladies designed Confederate Circle. We have a monument placed there. And we even raised funds to have this unusual brick wall all around the cemetery to protect it. That came from our funds.
Alright guys, that's going to conclude today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. Lots of Southern history here in the old Live Oak Cemetery. If you're new to my channel, please subscribe. See you in the next one. Peace.